So you can see here how I've got the coax cable routed out from behind where the actual radio is, and it comes out over here. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull back this nasty carpet here. Just ignore how dirty my vehicle is. But you can see this is generally where all of my cabling goes. That's the CB coax. This is the ham radio coax. That's the coax as well, and a couple other. There's a couple red wires coming in and a black wire going up to a ground location. So there's a grommet up here underneath. I'll show you from the engine bay, and obviously with all the head units and all of the trim pieces removed, it's very easy to fish things around and get cables routed where you want. You could route cables out to the left, out to the right. You could route them through the vehicle out to your hatch. You could route them into the engine bay. Depends on where you want your antenna to be. My antennas are going to be on the front bumper, and I'll show you the details of that here in a little bit. So the back of both of my radios have a blade style connector on it. Now you can actually buy a standard, I think it's like a T connector is what it will be called, but a connector that mates with the ham radio connector. But it just has blades in it, kind of like a spade type blade connector on it. So I'm going to run my wiring, and I'm going to crimp on basically the female version of that, so I can just flip on the wires and snap them on and call them good. Now, if I'm good, which I very well might not be, my goal is to basically twist two of these together and put one connector on it, and that'll go to the CB radio. And then the other female spade connector, since it's just one wire, I'm not piggybacking on this one. This will go to the back of the ham radio. I'll just put some heat shrink tubing there. Regular crimp connector, and shrink that down. Like I said, this connector will go to the back of the CB. This one will go up, go to the back of the ham, and I'll have one cable feeding it all. The ground's going to follow a similar logic. Both of them get spliced into one connection at the back of the CB radio. They'll jumper wire from the back of the CB to the back of the ham, and the long end will go back to the engine compartment. And let's start fishing things through. As a quick public service announcement here, these Wi-Fi heat shrink connectors are awesome that I get on Amazon. Unfortunately, I don't have the right ones that I need, and I don't want to wait another 2 days for more connectors to show up. But the nice thing about these, this is a mixed kit, but it's got ring terminals, it's got spade terminals. I don't have any female spade terminals left, but the nice thing is that the jacket insulation on these is actually heat shrink. So you crimp them on, and then you just hit them with the lighter, and it shrinks up and makes a really good weather-tight seal. Some of them also have adhesive on the inside of that, so then when you shrink it down, it also glues all of the connections there. If you need to free up some space to get to the wires under the glove box, a couple Phillips screws at the latch, a couple Phillips screws at the corners, and then it just kind of comes down. And put this in the back seat for safekeeping. Like a complete rat's nest of wires, but the moral of the story is I went ahead and fished my red wire that's going to go to the battery. This is going to be the connector at the bottom of the CB. Little jumper connector is just going to go up above to the next level to the back of the ham radio. I've also got my ground wires. Again, this connector is going to be down low, and the little pigtail is going to fish back behind and go to the ham radio and use that same 12 gauge circuit. That's how that's going to go. I've got my coax cable that is for my CB radio, and I've got my coax cable that is for my ham radio. So all of my connections back here are good, so I'm just going to start putting this back together. So all I did was connect those spade connectors on the back, connect the coax to the back, and I just routed everything into the floorboards on the passenger side, so everything else is going to be over here and in the engine bay and outside the vehicle. I just double checked all of my accessories are working, charging things, all that good stuff. Radio is turning on, which is as expected. And I will go ahead and point out there is a rubber grommet up there where the passenger's right foot would be, up top. And you can usually snake things through from the engine bay, but I'll show you that. So behind the battery here is a grommet in the back of the firewall, and this is where I run and fish coax cables and wires through. So it's a rubber grommet. There's a big wire harness already going through it. I was able to take a razor blade and kind of just puncture a small hole in the surrounding rubber. And I use the wire coat hanger method, where I take a wire coat hanger, stretch it out, I duct tape the end of the wires through, and I just kind of poke it through the hole, and it'll go through the grommet, it'll come out underneath the glove box on the passenger side. I usually take a can of Plastidip or some type of rubberized spray, and I've sprayed around the grommet to try and kind of help seal it up a little bit. You know, some of that Flex Seal stuff would probably be pretty good. So the black wire is the old wire that I used to have feeding just my CB radio, but since I've got a ham radio that's going to consume more power and have higher amperage, I'm upgrading to 12 gauge wiring. So I just went ahead and cut the old wire, and I taped the new wire that I'm going to fish upwards underneath the glove box there. So it took a little bit of time to figure out exactly which wire it was that I was pulling, and I found this one. So if I'm lucky, and I might not be lucky because I do got zip ties and it's in a wire loom, it looks like, but if I'm lucky, did I make it? Oh yeah, I made it. But I got another zip tie. Alright, and here's the new wire. I'll have to rerun it with some wire loom and everything, but you get the picture. I've got 12 gauge red wire that can go direct to battery. Of course, this looks like a rat's nest of wires right here, but this is the CB coax, and I went ahead and taped the ham radio coax, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to pull it up around this power wire that I've already ran, and if I'm lucky, I'll see that blue tape pop right through the firewall. And here we are. That was actually easier than I thought. Sometimes the coax connector on the end can get in the way, make it a little difficult to fish it through. So underneath the glove box there are a couple pretty large bolts that are part of the chassis ground. So if you wanted to, you could just run ring terminals there, and you can ground your radios there, or you can run them straight to the battery. I've I guess had my grounds in that location for a number of years and never had any issues, so I might just leave them there but run a larger gauge wire. So the rest of this is kind of organizing wires. I did decide to cheat with the ground wire. Instead of going to the battery, I'm going to get it to the chassis ground behind here. But these are those wire connectors I was talking about. It's got heat shrink built in as the insulation, so you don't have to have tubes of heat shrink. You just crimp them on and use a lighter or heat gun or whatever, and it shrinks up the tubing, and it's got adhesive on there, so it seals it to the jacket of the wire, and this makes a very strong connection. I love these. Find them on Amazon, Wi-Fi. I'm going to go ahead and bolt this up to this steel cross member, and that'll ground both of my radios. And now I just got to do a inline fuse on the battery side and connect that to the battery terminal and hook up an antenna. That's probably a whole nother video in and of itself. So in true YouTube fashion, I didn't actually show you what I did. I just told you what I was going to do, and here's the end result. So here's the fuse holder. I got a 15 amp fuse in it right now, and this has a ring terminal. It bolts to this stud right here. This stud is just connected to, this is a circuit breaker that goes to the winch, but this is all on the 12 volt positive. The red wire goes through the grommet, goes to the back of the radio. The back of the radio is grounded to that known good ground inside the cab underneath the glove box, and the coax comes out. Now if you look at my antenna mount for the CB radio, I just welded a tab on here. It's got a stud mount. This is a fire stick antenna, and it just bolts into it like that. I'll show you details of the stud mount later, but basically I'm going to have to do some fabrication, because I'm going to have to weld one right here, so I'm going to have it kind of symmetrical. My ham antenna here, since it'll be smaller, and that'll be in my line of sight. CB antenna will be here. It's not necessarily the best install as far as antenna location, since it's not on a horizontal ground plane, but it should be good enough. If not, I'll get a bigger antenna, or I might move it up to the roof, but I think it'll be good enough for what I need. So in the cab here, this is my CB microphone. So that's over here right by the key switch. I'll end up putting my ham radio microphone, similar spot over here most likely, maybe up top to make it a little easier to grab. But this is the ham radio. My Bluetooth module that plugs into the auxiliary input kind of blocks it, gets in the way, but whatever. Push button, and that cycles on. There's a couple repeaters, looks like I have programmed into it. I'll have to go through and make sure everything is up to date, but the radio is on. and it turns on, turns off, and it's ready to go minus the antenna. So I'll wait for daylight to get to grinding, drilling holes, and welding. So that is all that I have to show you for today.